Good day. Dead Space is really the only survival horror series that I actually like. Unfortunately, it's not really survival horror anymore. Dead Space 1 was a great example of survival horror. Dark and claustrophobic corridors, limited ammo, and powerful enemies all made this game a real challenge to get through. And when one finished this game, one did actually feel fairly accomplished when completing it. Dead Space 2 refined the gameplay seen in Dead Space 1, but made the game slightly more action-oriented. It did, however, give Isaac Clarke the ability to speak, and his personality was fairly decent. Overall, Dead Space 2 was a very solid game and a worthy sequel, and we'll be taking a closer look at this game at a later date. And now we come to Dead Space 3. Now, you had better bloody well have played Dead Space 1 and 2, otherwise you will have no clue what's going on. The game does try to fill in all the plot details, but seriously, why would you introduce yourself to a series with the third installment? It would make no sense! So now, let's ready our plasma cutter and open the hatch and take a look at Dead Space 3. As one would expect, the game looks really good graphically. Everything is highly detailed and the monsters have good damage modeling, and overall, this game just looks nice. The gameplay is pretty much unchanged from Dead Space 1 and 2, although now you can roll. Many fans of earlier games have complained about this feature, but in all honesty, you will never use it. You face human enemies so infrequently, you'll most likely forget that you even have it. The game itself is vastly easier than previous titles. You get numerous health packs and will at times not even have room for all the ammo and health packs that you'll be picking up. One big complaint that many have had is the fact that now all ammo is universal. Well, like with the rolling, in all honesty, this doesn't really matter much, mainly because in the earlier games, you usually just found ammo for the guns that you had on you at the time. Another change is the fact that you can only carry 2 weapons. This also doesn't matter because in Dead Space 1 and 2, the plasma cutter is literally the only weapon you will ever need. But then again, there are some enemies in this game where you will actually need a second weapon for, specifically a fast-firing weapon. But moving on from that for a moment, the level design for the game is really quite good, especially the space segments. They're huge and you can do a decent amount of exploration out here. One thing I do find annoying is the fact that you actually have plenty of air. In the earlier games, the limited amount of oxygen really made the space segments more tense. The game also introduces side missions that are fun enough and really give the game some depth. However, there's one annoying thing with these that we will get into later as well. Of all the changes, the one I find the most annoying and angering is the fact that the rigs are now entirely cosmetic.
No, God! No, God, please, no!
Yes, this is very annoying. Horribly so. One of the great aspects of the earlier games was saving up your credits to buy a new rig. Not only was it cool to see Isaac get progressively more badass as the game went along, but it also had an impact on the gameplay as well. The better the rig, the more armor and inventory slots you got. Here, you start with a massive inventory, and armor is just another upgrade system that you use collectible resources on. Those resources will be touched upon later. The music for Dead Space 3 is not nearly as good as music seen in previous games. Generally, it's just generic action music. One really good thing about this game, though, is the fact that it's very long, which is rather rare these days. In fact, I would go as far to say that this is the longest game in the series. And now, let's move on to the story. The story for Dead Space 3 is also weaker than the previous games. Basically, it follows the same formula from the first 2 games. Something breaks, and Isaac has to fix it. And this gets kind of tedious after a while, because Isaac must literally be the most overworked engineer in history, because he can't go 6 feet without having to fix something. All that work, and he doesn't ever get paid. That being said, Isaac is still awesome, but unfortunately, he gets no character development at all in this game. He is the same character as he was in Dead Space 2. Now, as for the only real character development in this game, that will actually be touched upon later. There is still a good amount of creepiness to be found in Dead Space 3. You just have to look past the main plot, really. The best parts of the story actually take place in text logs and audio logs. But as far as the plot goes, it's absolutely nothing special. Everything is very predictable and it's completely uninspired. But then again, that's not to say that it's bad. It's very entertaining, but just bloody generic. And now let's get to the final part. EA crappiness. First and foremost, the store where you bought weapons and new rigs is gone. Now we have the bench. Now the bench was found in earlier games, although it was in a vastly different form. Essentially in earlier games, you infrequently found benches and used them to upgrade weapons and armor by using power nodes. These were also found infrequently and cost 10,000 credits at the store. Here, you find benches all over the place, and you upgrade weapons with 3 resources that are far easier to find than the power nodes ever were. In fact, in the game, you can get up to 3 resource bots that collect large amounts of resources for you. You can craft numerous types of weapons and upgrade them numerous ways. Although I found what I believe is to be the best weapon combo of them all. Plasma Cutter, fully upgraded damage, will dominate everything. Then, an upgraded minigun will dominate these little bastards. Rockets, grenades, and line guns need not apply. Now this bench system sounds great. It's very satisfying to collect resources to make better weapons, and then having to weigh the cost-benefit ratio of crafting a certain component. Well, that would be the case if EA hadn't said, screw actual challenge, and implemented a system where you can buy resources with real money. And what's worse, a recent statement by EA basically says that this type of horridity will be implemented in all of their future releases. Well, there goes any sort of challenge there. Also, your cute little scavenger droids can only be upgraded with DLC? What the hell? So, you know, that game you just spent $60 on, well, be prepared to spend a little more if you actually want to get all the content. And then we get to the co-op. Now, the co-op for Dead Space is actually somewhat interesting. Your co-op partner actually has a legitimate character. He has great dialogue and actually has some character development. The only problem is, if you try to play this game single player, which is exactly what this review is covering, you miss all of his character development and all of his actual impact on the story, which is absolutely horrible because Carver, as he's called, is the only character in this game with legitimate character development. So basically, you miss out on a huge chunk of content when it comes to this. Also, there are some side missions that you can't access unless you actually have a co-op partner in-game. But this is not a big a problem as it could be, simply because there are very few of them found throughout the game. Also, why would a ship be labeled co-op? Really? That's just kinda silly. Now, you may have noticed that I have been one-hit killing enemies all throughout this review. As I said earlier, the game is very easy, and when you go into New Game Plus, the game is even easier still. The only problem is, the weapons I'm using right now, I had at the end of my actual playthrough. Basically, as you progress through the game, it doesn't get harder, it actually gets easier, mainly because you'll have upgraded your rig to its fullest armor and health potential, and also your weapons will be fully upgraded to the point where you can hold a large amount of ammo and do a lot of damage. Really, you're probably only going to die maybe 5 times in the entire game. Now, one thing I have noticed is the fact that the hard mode for this game is basically analogous to the normal mode found in Dead Space 1 and 2. And as easy as it is, I can only wonder how much easier casual mode is. What does it do? Just play the game for you? And so now we get to the final question. Should you spend $60 or more on this game? Well, yes. Despite the EA crappiness, the weak story, and the somewhat easier gameplay, this is still a solid sequel, and it's a very good game in its own right. And I can't really recommend it enough. Really though, I am worried about EA's greater crappiness. This whole microtransaction thing is not going to end well, but for right now, Dead Space 3, a great game. And so this is General Lotz, signing off.